Good morning, traders, and a very happy Monday out there to everyone. Hope that y'all had a nice weekend there, and of course, we did a little rolling back the clocks there, so getting those back in order, which also means that our clocks will sync back up there with the Europe session close. So we'll have that to consider, have back in order there, that 11:30 Eastern time of day window. So we'll have that going for us, rolling back the clocks and everything, and then outside of that, I'm just looking over at our economic calendar here for today. We're nice and light, in other words, don't have any major 8:30 data points coming out from the U.S. Really, the main thing on the board there today, you have a small figure from Canada out at 10 o'clock, and then supposedly member Cook there, FOMC, set to speak at 11 o'clock Eastern, but those are the two items there on the board. And also, as we know, just on a separate note, that most of the bigger earnings, if you would, are out of the way. We will still have a couple stragglers, just the tail end of earnings that we'll be dealing with for this week there. But with that said, those are the main items just to kind of keep in mind on the housekeeping front. And now we will be able to come over here and blow up this daily chart on these S&Ps, which we know had quite the showing there last week. In other words, our single time framing mode of higher highs and higher lows that we had put in there over the past 5 days of trading there. So very impressive and good progress that we had made. Obviously, we know that we had the nice readings on the 2 period rate of change as well, just indicating new momentum highs on the short-term basis. So we have all that going for us. And then in the overnight session, just in the Globex, we kind of kept things pretty contained. We did have 43.74 as the overnight low and 43.86.75 there as the overnight high. So not too large of a Globex range. Obviously also doing some consolidation there just from all the progress that we had made on Friday, but overall, not too bad. So once again, just to have it on the sheets there, 43.91.75 will be that Friday's high to keep in mind. Outside of that, just starting things off here with the daily chart. We know that we are also a little bit stretched from the 5 SMA, and we did come back up right into this previous congestion zone. So respecting it for the most part. Like we said, 43.10 all the way down there is where that 5 SMA comes into sight. So doing a pretty decent job of keeping ourselves maintained and holding above that. And what we can do here is just mark off this nice previous day's high was using this 43.40 as just coming back up just from the lower end of this previous congestion zone. So it did a pretty good job of even closing up above that. And now we'll see how they want to handle that previous day's high. If we were to come in and put in some type of lower high there up against the previous day's high, give us plenty of room to roam inside of yesterday's action. But that's where we stand on the daily view, right? So that's where we kind of kick things off, kind of the top down type of feeling. And then as we come down here to a slightly lower time frame, such as the 240-minute chart, although it's not going to be too dissimilar here, we all get the same feeling of coming back up into the range. What you might want to note is that the rhythm here on the oscillator, as we've come up here, just a little shortening in the length of the swings up here. Nothing of like immediate concern. Hold on one moment here. Sorry about that. I had a little scratchy throat there. But as we come up here, we can see we're just kind of holding by trading sideways as opposed to giving up much ground. So on this 240-minute display, we might want to be aware of our oscillator configuration. However, if we come down to like a 120-minute or even an hourly time frame, what we'll start to see is the potential for this. Like we said, if we were to come in and put in any type of lower high, so we have the hourly chart, obviously a nice mark up there from Friday's close, proceeded to pull back just ever so slightly, and then like we said in the overnight session, it's been fairly calm, but so far we have not made the full retest up on that hourly chart. So if we were to have the failure to make the new high, and then we would want to be just concerned of our little lower boundaries here, just because we did have a pretty good impulsive move there to the upside. So should we not make the full retest up, also would be kind of watching this 43.63 zone down below in the case of the E-minis. But for now, they're holding the ground. They're very calm and contained in the overnight session, so no major urgency, as far as the market moving around there. And then lastly, of course, since we had so much progress in the pit session last week, we'll also want to note that we'll still have two unfilled gap areas down below. Does not mean by any means that we have to go right down there and start to work on them, but just to have them on the sheets, the closest one there is going to come in at 43.58 and a quarter. And since it was fairly large, sometimes even if we do get down towards them, oftentimes we've seen them do a partial fill on the first attempt down. So that's what we have lining up there with our S&Ps. Back into the previous congestion zone, a little hint of loss of momentum on the 240-minute chart, but really what we'll want to be latching onto there is seeing how they want to respond to that previous day's high in case they make that failure test there on that hourly time frame. So not a bad view there for our S&Ps. Then we want to come over here to the DAX side of the equation. DAX also had a pretty nice rhythm there last week. In other words, having its, consecutive low to high days. However, on Friday, the DAX did proceed to give us a bit more of a pause bar up there. In other words, a little bit of a consolidation day. So in the case of the DAX, we can at least see that we're much closer here towards this 5 SMA, which comes in at 15,151 there in the case of this DAX. So doing an okay job of holding above it. However, we are actually on the other side of a Friday's low there. That's going to be 15,218. So that will be a nice level to keep ourselves aware of there, seeing as to how the DAX wants to trade around that, because over here on the S&Ps we have not traded obviously below that Friday low. So DAX in a slightly different configuration, but we'll see. 15,150, like we said, would be that 5 SMA down below. That's speaking on the daily time frames. We come down here to the 120-minute, the 2-hour time frame here. Similar to some extent. It wasn't as well built out as we had there in the ES, but we did have previous congestion zone in the DAX future as well to keep in mind. So we did do some good trading up there, and I just have a yellow line here at 15,190 for the DAX, just in case we were to slip down and take out our little previous cycle low that we had from the trading during last week, simply because if we were to come down and bring this down to a slightly lower time frame on this DAX beneath this area, not a whole lot of trading was done through that zone. So that would be just a bit of a caution zone, because if we did take that out, we could come down and do some additional repairing on some of that progress that we had made to the upside. But for now, they're doing okay, holding their ground. It's just a matter of being aware of that point in case we did start to slip down and loosen up any further. So daily chart, we'll keep a watch on that 5 SMA just on the other side of the previous day's low, and then our 120-minute display with that 15,190 should serve a-okay there in that DAX. And then moving on along outside of our index future category, we have that of the euro currency. With this EC, though, we gotta blow it up just a notch more and include a couple more data points. We know it had quite the showcasing of some nice upside and momentum there last week on Friday, coming out of the 3-bar balance mode, a fairly wide one, mind you, with the balancing act that we had on Thursday. But we did proceed to finally, take the open door, if you would, and give ourselves the better range expansion bar. Interestingly, we did not quite get above the 1.07780 there in the euro currency. That was the visible swing high there from the bar on September 20th. So pretty darn close, though, I'd say. And then in the Globex session, as we can see here, we also were able to look above the previous day's high. Big extension bar on Friday. We already got the test above the Friday high, so, range expansion bar out of the 3-bar, look above the previous day's high. That is all fine and well. But now we can see we're just kind of testing around that point. 1.07655 was that point of interest there from Friday's high. So having some mild play around it. Another market here, although this one's being a tad more behaved, if you would, after having its new highs on the 2-period rate of change. Just in other words, from the Friday close up against the close 2 days ago. So real nice 2-period rate of change reading. Good range expansion, a little change in character, if you would. And what we'll want to see is if they can, come in and maintain that. Oftentimes after we do see a very large reading on the 2-period rate of change or good range expansion, oftentimes it lends itself to a little bit of a pause consolidation day on the day following. they've already gotten the test above the PD high, the previous day's high there, so we have to give them some credit for that. And then as we come down, we'll take this 240-minute chart for starters. That's going to be that same feeling of the previous visible swing high. And then as we come down, something like this hourly time frame really showcased the nice march to the upside that we had, that nice momentum, if you would. And then the follow through, which is already unfolded overnight. We already got the higher high out of the way. So as far as the EC goes, any further consolidation, we do have 1.07410 to work with, and then the caution area, just because we did have all this nice work to the upside that we didn't spend a whole lot of time developing. 1.07215 I'd be using as more of like a caution area there for the euro currency, but not too bad in its progress. You can see this 120-minute data is good extension. It's higher high and really just kind of holding up there and maintaining its ground, so almost doing more so of like positive consolidation. Worth keeping an eye on perhaps, because it just comes in front of the 1.07410 would be the hourly moving average there for the euro currency, that 20-period EMA on this hourly time frame. So for now, holding their ground though, not too bad, just dropping back a little bit on the other side of that Friday high, and we'll see they got plenty of areas to monitor there on those hourlies and 120-minute time frames. So that is our euro currency. And then next on up, we have the crude here. The crude, which still has been putting in, well, we'll look at that in just a moment, but we can kick things off with the daily for starters here. These daily bars, whilst they have been showing us some overlap, we have been making slightly lower lows on the daily time frames. We had 80.74 as the low. Then we put it down to 80.30, 80.22, and then on Friday's trading we did trade down to 80.10. So despite a high degree of price bar overlap, the tails on the daily chart are still coming in at lower prices. So when we come in to look at the intraday charts in a moment, we'll see that we're still kind of monitoring or have yet to see any type of higher low forming there in the crude. So for now, a lot of bar overlap. Friday's lows a ways down there. That's down there at 80.10, and of course Friday's high is 83.60. So a very large range to play inside of. So for one, wouldn't be shocked to see us form an inside range bar today, potentially there on the crude. So that's our daily configuration. As we come down to our intraday, such as the hourly chart or the 120-minute, whilst we've been having a few instances of slightly higher highs on the intraday data, the cycle lows that we've been putting in have been coming in at slightly lower values there. So we still have that going on, the slightly lower lows, although we don't quite have that same feeling of the lower highs. You can see we've been kind of putting in higher highs, so lower lows but higher highs, so hence forming ourselves a slight amount of range activity here. Really how I'm looking at this here in the crude, 80.10, which is a ways down there, is that previous day's low. So if we were to come back down any deeper and trade towards that, really would be interested to see if they have the ability to put in any type of higher low. Outside of that, we've already had a good reaction up off of the lows in the overnight, coming back up towards this 82.08, which was a previous spike low that we had on the hourly chart. So the crude's kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place here. We'll see how it wants to trade during today's action. If it does want to, perhaps try and form an inside range bar, simply because Friday's action was so large there, gives them a lot of room to play back and forth between. But not too bad of a view there, and just for good measures, for fun here, we could see that even over on the gasoline side of things, the products, the unleaded, also keeping things fairly tame. The unleaded, despite not quite having those same lower lows like we have in the crude, also has a pretty good degree of bar overlap trading inside of Friday's range there. So just a quick little peek at the unleaded in comparison to our crude there, which has been having quite the swings there. And then we have the gold and the bonds before kind of getting things out of the way for our morning overview here. The gold, very interesting during last week's trading, because we had the close below the 5 SMA, but it was in the backdrop of a 3-bar balance mode, so we didn't really do too much damage to this. Still, of course, context, right? putting this into view, that we had this nice march to the upside and really have been doing a decent job of maintaining this after having been on the extended run up. So just doing some balancing act up here at the top of the swing. But what we did see, it did not do it right away, but was the close back above the 5 SMA there on Friday's trading. So we closed back above the Scion line after having been on the extended run and giving the first close below. Not necessarily the most earth-shattering, if you will, because we did leave a tail up above it as well. In other words, we traded up but did not quite close up there. So we're still working with a lot of work up here. Also, you can note that we've been playing around the 2000 handle there in the gold. So as far as the daily configuration goes, main thing we'd want to note there is that we did close above the 5 SMA there last week, and still, kind of hovering and playing on both sides of 2000 as far as the daily goes. Coming over to the 120 minute or the hourly time frames here, we had that nice rhythm with that kind of U-turn feeling right when we failed to make that full retest up and then proceeded to come back down. So using this 2003 here as kind of being an area of interest, just because we did pick up some steam when we formed that failure test. We started to come back below that 2003 and accelerated to some extent. So for the gold, if we did showcase any strength or any testing to the upside, would be kind of watching that 2003 mark, coupled with the round number of 2000, but really 2003 at least has the nice visible swing high for us to work with there. So I would be keeping an eye on that for the gold. And outside of that, really, sometimes it's also good to just really help put these things into context. We're doing a little price equals time after having quite the nice markup to the upside. I mean, the 120-minute data really helps showcase the nature in which we, sprung to life after forming our little balancing, our little gap on the reopening, and then really been built out this nice swing. And now we're just kind of digesting all that progress that we had made to the upside, but still in a rather positive format. We haven't done too much damage there to the gold, in other words. So that's there with our 120-minute display, still holding the ground. We got 2003 up above, and just in case we do slip down there, I mean, really you'd be looking at the overnight low as far as any type of major downside points of interest. That 1988.8 would be the overnight low there as far as the gold goes. And then lastly here we have the bonds, the 30 years here. Also having a nice showcasing of strength there last week. We did the look above 114.10 there during last week's trading with a nice extended tail area. So we had that going for us. We'll come over here and look at the intraday in just a moment, but we did have very strong 3 days of low to high action, so it goes without saying that we are also in this market here, stretched quite a ways there from the 5 SMA, which comes in at 111.25, so good March, very nice range that we had on Friday's trading. Another one here as well. You could start to see this in a couple of the markets. The one that had a nice new 2-period rate of change high reading there from Friday's trading. So just indicative of some nice short-term momentum that came into the market. So we did do the look above and then proceeded to back off and closed quite a ways away from that 114.10. So we left that hanging out there in the bonds. But when we come over here to the intraday, such as the hourlies, 120-minute display, it's going to give us that same feeling, right? Nice extension, look above previous swing high. And this will be, I'm sure, one that'll be real nice to view on the market profile display, just because that's really going to showcase the nature in which we had this. Here, we can even do it. Make it seem a little bit more dramatic here, like the 15-minute data from this nice impulse that we had to the upside during that early morning Friday trading from that morning data point. And we'll see this on the MP that we came down and filled in some of the blanks intraday there. So this was during the Globex session before we went into the opening. Then we had the US morning session. We came in and filled in a good portion, perhaps not all of them, but filled in a lot of blanks. So in other words, sharp up, sharp down, or look above and, fail. So as far as the bonds go, I've already filled in some of the blanks there. We did the return to sender, if you would. And really, looking at this 112.12 here is kind of being the next major significant zone of interest. Just because if we started to come back beneath that, then we would also be kind of filling in, some additional prints there to the downside. Just because we did have rather impulsive moves here off the lows in the bonds, right? Nice impulse up, brief consolidation, impulse up, etc. So this one went a little bit more sideways, so didn't really do it, filling in most of this other work that we had, beneath this 112 area. So in comparison to this action that we had overnight, good boost up, and then proceeding to come in and fill in most of the blanks there as far as those bonds go. And then we can also, just for good measures here, come over and take a quick glance at the notes, the 10-year, since a couple of you guys have mentioned the 10s, like in keeping an eye on the notes for comparison. So in today's case, though, we will note, no pun intended, that there's not too much dissimilarities there. We also had the full look above. In this case, it was 108.16 in the case of the 10-year notes. However, I would have to say, pretty similar in their nature. We had this super nice impulse to the upside with not a whole lot of trading done through it. So we can note that both the 10s and the bonds are coming in to fill in a little bit of structural work there. So not too bad of a view there in the 10-year notes. And then lastly here, before we kind of wrap this up with a little bow, is that I like to keep a watch on these yield charts as well, the 30-year yields and the notes respectively. And of course, since we just had our little fixed income or bond opening there, what we'll come in and see is that we're just kind of opening here at 4.792%. So we know that we have a gap area that remains quite a ways up above or down below, if looking at the bond futures, up above as far as the yields go. And we'll see where we're set to trade around there. We got 4.796, which was the top of the area that we had from Friday's trading there in the yield. So not too bad of a look. Sometimes nice just as far as a little something different there as opposed to looking at the bond futures themselves. So just wanted to take a quick look there at the yields. And with that said, I'm going to include a couple more data points on this chart, blow it up there just a notch, and see what we have lining up for ourselves here in this early morning session. But so far, keeping things nice and tame. And then like we saw, a couple of these charts had some nice zones where we could go in and develop. So that'll be something real nice that'll look on that we can take a look at on Damon's charts, which will be up there in just about another 30 minutes or so. And then we will be rocking and rolling for this day in front of us, and we'll make sure to have a nice start here to our Monday, the first day of our trading week here, and the first full week of November to work with as well. So I'm going to let things settle in here. We covered the bases and see what type of action we have lining up in the early morning session, and I'll be sure to hop right on the microphone if I do indeed see something lining up for us early on here. So in the meantime, just going to dial a couple things back and see what we have lining up for ourselves here today.